because we're now
Okay, I know. Sorry, folks. All right, I'll kick us off. So I had two reminders that I wanted to share. So the first, you may have seen this already, but please go to last week on Moodle, where Kelly, our Chief Academic Officer, has posted a anonymous feedback poll for you, and that will have six short questions getting your feedback on how the course has been going so far, and it really helps us to be able to improve the learning experience. So check that out if you hadn't had a chance yet, and we are requesting your feedback by this Sunday. The second item is just a umbrella announcement that several of you have unfinished assignments on Moodle, whether that was quizzes that you were in the middle of attempting or lessons. And so we don't want to penalize you. We want you to be able to finish those and master the content. So please go back through week by week. And if you have any unfinished business, go ahead and get that out of the way. The goal should be that you have all of that completed before we come back for spring break. So we've got one more week of class next week, and then we've got a week off for spring break, where of course you'll likely be working toward completing your community lab, and you can also finish up those other pieces so that you come back with clean slate and ready to rock and roll for the rest of the semester. Any questions on either of those two items? Okay, just as a final reminder, so your second community lab, which we'll be talking about more later in this class, when Luke arrives, and we'll be breaking up into small breakout groups. That will be due at the end of the week following spring break. So we'll have one more week when we get back to work on that. We'll meet in small groups and get some peer feedback, and then you'll be submitting those later that week. Okay, over to you, Daniel.
Thank you, everybody. And well, thank you, Rosie, and thank you, everybody, for joining class. I know many people are going to be logging into the recording session. What I want to talk about today, I'm going to give a little bit of a lecture on a very important topic, which is measuring these, so that as you're starting your labs, the question then becomes how you're going to measure it. And so let's jump right in with what will be a fairly short, I think, presentation on measurement. And there are a couple of ideas here that you may want to grab with a piece of paper or something like that, because they're really essential to track measurement. So we've all agreed, and it's central to seed scale, that we work from facts about ourselves. When we are making opinions, we all believe that we're talking from the facts. Even if we're talking from our opinions, we are usually so convinced of our opinions and our own ideas that we misinterpret our opinions to be facts. You will say, I know, or I believe, and you believe that's to be a fact. It isn't. It's your opinion. So the question then becomes much more complicated when it's about your community. Because in your community, you will have many opinions, and the people will believe them to be facts. And the difference between an opinion and a fact is whether it's objectively verifiable. In other words, is it subjective or objective? And if it's objective, it means that if multiple people approach the same issue, they will see the same thing. Okay, so then there's the question about whether the facts are telling the truth. And we can make this very complicated. But if we make it complicated, then it becomes very hard to use. And if it's very hard to use, then we don't use it. So the question is, how do we find this in a usable, simple way? So what I want to talk about right now is finding your community's truth. And one of the first challenges in this is to separate yourself from your community. You're not the same thing, okay? So you have to let go of yourself in order to understand the whole. You can be part, you definitely are part, but you're not the same. You live in a complex adaptive system. Your community is a complex adaptive system. So your community is not the same today as it was yesterday. And your community will be different tomorrow. So what is the truth? And we use statistics to control this variability. And what I'm going to be doing here this week and next week is to give you a very quick trip through statistics. It's actually not very difficult. Usually we think of our courses on statistics as very difficult. And you know, people are afraid to take statistics in graduate school. But statistics is necessary in order to distinguish the multiple worlds that we live in. Especially every year, we live in more and more worlds. It's like this image says, we have our community world, we have our spiritual world, and they are often different. We have our economic world, we have our Facebook world, we have our school world. And how do you figure out the truth in all of these? Because every one of those has got opinions and false facts. So you need a mental understanding of how to figure out what is true, what is verifiable, what is objective in these many worlds. And furthermore, there's two types of information. There's qualitative and quantitative. Now, you remember 3 weeks ago when we were talking about the feedback loop between quality and quantity in this course? That as you get improving quality, that causes a rise in quantitative involvement, more people are joining. And as more people join, that prompts innovation. And so you get more qualitative growth. That's the engine. And that works. It's like a car. It's like an airplane. It works. It goes someplace. That engine of the qualitative feedback and the quantitative growth. But you have to measure it. It's very complicated. You need a way to understand it before you can measure it. Because otherwise you're working from your opinions. So I want to focus very quickly today on a couple of key ideas that underlie statistics. The first is the normal distribution. You see the curve on the right-hand side that looks like a mountain? We're going to be talking about that today. It's called the normal distribution. And then underneath it is what we call the paranormal distribution. And it's very funny because I found this graphic that is of the but it's of a ghost. The scientific name is the normal distribution and the paranormal distribution, but some clever graphic artist came up with the idea that the paranormal distribution is a ghost, which of course is a good representation of the idea. Now, what statistics does is it finds the bias. Statistics, the basic idea of statistics is it tells you how likely you are to be wrong or how likely you are to be right. And being right is usually right in the middle here of the normal distribution. But being right can also be way out here on the edge of the distribution. And we're going to be talking about that. So being right, you can be right anywhere within the normal distribution. And when you're with a community of people, they're all under that curve, all that differences. So what statistics does is it tells you, it finds normalcy, that means, and the distance away. So it tells you how far you are away from the normal. Now, I said there are going to be several issues you may want to remember and take notes of. And the first one is this. Statistics is fundamentally controlled guessing. When you went to school, you took mathematics. In mathematics, you're right or you're wrong. 2 plus 2 equals 5? No. 2 plus 2 equals 4. There's a right and wrong in mathematics. What statistics does is it tells you how to guess. And in life, my friends, learning how to guess is more helpful because it's the real world. Very seldom in the real world are you right or wrong. There are many rights and there are many ways to be wrong. So understanding this core idea of guessing is what we're talking about today. We're going to learn how to make our best guesses. Okay? Now, you can be wrong for various reasons. Your perspective is wrong. You're looking at them from the wrong direction. You're looking at it from your own position rather than from the position of the whole. Or you're making a generalization that is specific to place or time. Time has changed. Or you've had a bad sampling method. These are the 4 major ways that you can be wrong. Perspective, generalizing, time and reality has changed, or you have a bad sampling method. Now, the other aspect that's really key here is that we all like to dig in and find the reasons for things. But when you dig in to complexity, you focus on the parts. And when in complexity, in complex adaptive systems, when you try to take the whole apart, it's no longer the whole. So if you take your arm off, you can still have your arm, but you're no longer Irfani in Kabul, you're just an arm. The person is gone, or Fabienne is gone. You cannot have Fabienne and take her arm away. Okay? It's the whole, it's the emergent whole. Okay? So you have to be very careful when you focus in and not to miss the whole while focusing on the parts. And so much of what we try to do is we have this emergent phenomenon like a river that's moving. And we come to that river to try to fix the river of life, but we're bringing the wrong tools. We're bringing the tools of a hammer and a saw, which work fine for fixing a house, but they don't work well for fixing a river. Now we're going to be having several slides here to talk about this very important concept, which I'm coming back to the normal curve. Everybody, all these people on the normal curve are true. They're all a member of your community. But see how different they are? They look like they're just people, They'll look like they're all the same. But this person's carrying a briefcase. And this person's carrying the briefcase in the other hand. And this person's waving with both hands. And this person's waving with both hands in a different way. We're all different. Even though we're in the same community, we're all different. So what we're trying to do when we're measuring our community is that we're recognizing the whole of the normal curve, everybody who's under the curve. But we're also having to compensate for our differences and recognize the differences. We have to, the outliers here, way over here, are just as important as the people in the middle. The people in the middle are what is called the normal. There are more of them, but there's some oddballs out here on the edges. So how do we work that? Now, the question is the role of perspective. So perspective is very different. It depends. If you're from the outside, looking from the top down, looking from the bottom up, the place in it, the events are the same. But the perspective and the understanding differs depending on where you are. So how do you grab this difference? The first thing you have to do is to be aware that that difference exists. And then there comes the question of what is the true evidence? What matters? Now, this is a map of the state of West Virginia. It's where I live. Here's Pendleton County, way over here on the right-hand side. Pendleton County in West Virginia is the only county in this state of 55 counties that doesn't have the mineral coal. Every other county has coal. We're different. Okay? Pendleton County is also different because, as Kristen will tell you, even though Kristen, who's in this call, comes from Pocahontas, she will, I'm sure, will admit that Pendleton County is a nicer place to live than Pocahontas.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
But we're different, and we have different priorities. And our truth may be determined by our economy, our health, our security. We have, even in our difference of our communities, we have different perspectives and importance. So what is truly your community? Time is changing. The issue of time, which had this perspective over on the left of hopes and economy and security, with time it changes. And security, for instance, has become much more important. As we were talking about in the beginning of class, for Matt, I suspect, security suddenly in his home, pardon me, for Matt, I'm guessing security is now more important today than it was 2 days ago because of the tragedy that Matt had 10 minutes from where he lives with the murders of 10 people. This changes with time, okay, as these move around. So how do we understand from perspective, from time, from place, what is the true facts? So let's come back to the normal distribution. In the normal distribution, we have standardized differences. And that's what I want to emphasize. Remember, what we're trying to do is to help you make the best guess. You better understand that you're always going to be wrong. If you're doing community-based work, you are always going to be wrong some of the time with some of the people. Here in the center, the average performance, if this is the middle of the curve, what is normal in your community you want to be basically always at least when what is considered the normal distribution, 68%. We'll talk more about this in the beginning. That means you have a 2/3 chance of being right. Okay? If you guess, remember this is about guessing. This is statistics. If you guess, you want to 2 times out of 3 be guessing correctly. Okay, that's what I'm trying to help you get to. How do you guess so that 2 times out of 3 you're right? Now, there's the next thing, which is to guess so that you'll be more right. And this is where I want to move to the next slide here, which is statistical significance. That's the way we talk about it. The term statistical significance. I'm sure you have seen in newspaper reports, scientific things where people say it's significant. It's statistically significant. And this is the second key message I want you to understand so that you know how to use what people generally irresponsibly use. Okay. The word statistical significance means that if we are in one standard deviation, that's the purple area or blue area right here in the middle. You're 2/3 likely to be right if you're in here. So that is when people say this is statistically significant. Now, if we are, whoa, my things ran away from me. Oh, let's go, here we go. If we are this far away, which is not marked on this map, right here, you've got a 50-50 chance of being right. You're half of a standard deviation. And that means you know, actually, if you've got a 50-50 chance of being right, that's pretty good. Because, you know, you've got a half of a chance of being wrong too. But now this is where it gets really interesting. If you go from one standard deviation, which is the blue area, to 2 standard deviations, then you have a 95% chance of being right. Do you see this? That in a normal curve, which most things in life actually fall into the normal curve. It's amazing how often the normal curve is. And I'm not going to talk right now about paranormal and all those other issues. But in a normal curve, if you're 2 standard deviations right, you're 95% chance of being right. So right now for this vaccine that is being distributed for the pandemic, they're trying to get to 2 standard deviations. The Moderna, the Pfizer, the Johnson & Johnson vaccines are all trying to hit the 2 standard deviation position. The AstraZeneca was trying to hit 1 standard deviation. Now there's some questions about whether they have. It's in the newspaper every day. But when this big issue, which is life and death for people all over the world, this is what we're talking about when we're talking about the statistical significance of which you want. And there are many reasons why 1 statistical significance is just fine. Thank you very much. Now, if you want to get to 3 statistical different things, you're way out with the green here. And you're 99.8% right. You're almost totally right. But there is always a slight chance that you may be way out here on an outlier curve and you might be wrong. So you need to be open-minded to the fact that you might be dealing with some unusual situation where you're wrong. So let's come back. Statistics is fundamentally controlled guessing. It uses numbers, but because it uses numbers does not mean it's mathematics. Statistics is an approximation. It's giving you an idea, an understanding of what is your best guess. It's telling you where you are in this normal thing. And it's avoiding this paranormal situation of people just shooting off their ideas. We've all seen people talk irresponsibly about facts. And that's this ghost image of the paranormal distribution. So what I've wanted to do today is to focus on this idea of that we're now focusing on quantitative issues, how to know what to measure and assess, and how to fit within a normal distribution. We're going to be talking later in this course about how to understand qualitative issues. And I'm also going to be sharing with you a simple technique of quantitative measurements I'm going to share with you basically the idea of stratified sampling as a means of doing statistical analysis and getting a good approximation of where we're at. So welcome, Luke. We're glad you could join. So I jumped in and did the first part of the presentation, and now we're ready for the breakout groups. We may have people who want to ask questions about the presentation, but let me, before I turn it over to the breakout groups and to Luke to make the introduction to that, let me just say that what I showed you now was the first of 4 parts that I'm going to be talking about later out through this course. 2 parts deal with quantitative and 2 parts deal with qualitative. If we're going to be running scale squared, which is what the focus is right now with this lab, part of scale squared is the idea of experimentation. And you need to be able to do an experiment rather than just try something and see if it works. No, we're talking about experimentation, which means we have to be able to measure it. Okay? Otherwise, an experiment is, oh, let's just try it and see if it works. If it blows up in our face. No, we're going to do an experiment, which means we have to measure it. And we have to measure it accurately. And we have to measure it quickly. We don't want to come back with the facts 3 months from now. Your lab is due. You've got to get the response in. So you are going to need to be able to measure qualitatively and quantitatively. And you need to understand the core concept that you'll never be 100% sure you're right. You'll be guessing. And you want to know how accurate your guess is. That's the idea of the curve.
Dana, we have a fabulous question in the chat.
Okay, I'll give it to me, please.
From Grace. Can you give an example of what we would be guessing to measure in a community?
Oh, Grace, as Rosie said, fabulous. Yeah, how let's say you're trying to guess whether it's security is higher or lower. Security affects everybody's life. Okay? There are ways of approximating that. Let's say you're trying to guess hope. Remember on the chart I gave, hope. If hope is up there, you've got the engine of people working together. Now you can try to guess hope, well, what's in your heart, and say, oh, I think people are pretty hopeful today. Well, actually, how do you know? As opposed to guessing from inside your heart whether people are hopeful. Because if you can measure hope, which you can do, you can come up with some very simple questions and go out and do a stratified sample, as I will be showing you in an upcoming class, to how to ask questions in your community, so that you get a sense of whether the community is hopeful or not. And if your community is hopeful, going into what we call in seed scale called key indicators, hope is a very powerful key indicator of whether your community is going to work together. So you need to be able to measure hope. But usually people respond to hope simply from a gut feeling of one person. But I'm mindful of the time issue, and we can certainly keep talking about it, folks. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Luke. You might want to build off of something here.
Sure. Well, first of all, let me apologize for being late. My internet decided to go down, right? I checked it to make sure I could log in from my home office instead of the office where Daniel is, and then 5 minutes later it went down right at the start of class. So I do apologize. We will jump into breakout rooms. I do want to just say Daniel touched on the term experimentation, and just to orient everyone on where we are. We're really entering the period in the class where we are going to be looking at this concept of scale squared. And Daniel may have mentioned that, Daniel or Rosie may have mentioned that at the beginning of class. And so we're going to be looking at the two real active pieces there, the two things that we're just going to drill in on when it comes to scale squared is this whole idea of experimentation and then action learning from that. And we will continue to revisit it. You began to see it in your reading this week on the Model Counties project. And so while we don't have time to really jump into Model Counties this week, I will say keep up with those readings, take notes, because I believe it's next week when we really jump into the concept of scale squared. We want to be able to go back and look at these examples. And I think next week we may be looking at, is it Klaus? Yeah. So two good health projects of scale squared where we really use statistics and measurement, because it goes back to Grace's fabulous question. You need to know if you're talking about scaling up, and you need to be able to show people that you know. And not just that you personally know, but everyone knows because you have evidence. So much of scaling up is about measuring the scaling up. And we'll get back to that. But we want to take the rest of class to specifically give you all some time to touch base on your community labs. And so we will go into breakout rooms. And hopefully you have all had a chance to look at, to begin working on your lab and really have looked at step one, thought about it, building on your previous lab. Step one's pretty easy. You just pick one of the seeds to focus on based on your analysis. But as a group, go together and go around and present the seed you selected and explain what impact will look like if it scales up. In other words, why should this scale up? What's the benefit to it scaling up? And then if you have time, you can get into what needs to happen? What's the basic? Because that's then the next question, the next step in the assignment is really clarifying what are the steps that need to happen. But as a group, go around and present your seed and explain what impact will look like. And group members, ask people, help them, because we're gonna ask you all to measure this. And so when we're saying, what does it look like? We really want you to start to think, what are you gonna be tracking in your community to measure that things are getting better? To Daniel's example, that hope is in fact rising. So are there any questions on that? We can put that into the chat here. I will do it right now. And Rosie, whenever you want to open up the breakout rooms.
Okay. Yeah, take 3 to 5 minutes max each to talk about your seed. I'll send it you off now. Let us know if you got any questions. Welcome back. And in the last 5 minutes of class, we want to open up the floor and invite you to share not everything that you discussed in your group, but the most interesting or clear examples of what impact could look like if you grow your seeds. So feel free to share yours or another classmate's that you heard. We just want to get a couple examples to understand the diversity of what this could look like fitted to your local community. Brady, I see your videos on. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I don't hopefully Matt doesn't mind, but I like Matt's, so I'm gonna share Matt's. Yeah, so he's looking at doing a student council at his school, and I liked one of the things that he said, and it really connected to me. Was he has 2 or 3 kids that are actively like wanting to be involved right now, and he kind of said that scale to him might be just getting it to 5 or 6 kids that regularly attend, rather than the big bold places that he sees taking it in the future. Like for the purposes of the class, it might just be getting 5 or 6 kids to attend. So I think like our perspective of how we see and view the change is important, and I really, that what he said I thought was important, so I wanted to share.
Absolutely. You have to think about scale in the context of your community. So 5 to 6 students is doubling the participation, and that's huge for that group. Someone else, please jump in.
In our group, I was with Muriel.
Yes.
So the seed that had been chosen is what we call here Village Saving Loan and Association. The project is working with scouts to see how they can be financially independent. And obviously the impact that will be tracked will be to see if real life is improving with these participating scouts in this project.
Great.
The other seed that have been chosen is about improving public infrastructures in rural areas here in Bujumbura, in Burundi. And what will be measured will be the participation in different activities where people will be convened, and obviously the contributions, if financial contributions are needed within the community.
Yes,
and
you were looking.
All this, what will be
Go ahead.
looked will be how life is improving. Yeah.
Those are both great examples of how life can improve. And what I, will encourage both you and Muriel to think through more over the next couple of weeks is how are you specifically going to measure that? Obviously, measuring the participation of how many people are in the Village Saving and Loan Group, or people who are donating to build a new bridge or improve the road in your community, that's easy to measure. The life improvement, you might need to define a couple of clear indicators, which we'll get into next week. One other group want to share? Oh, Irfani, please.
Yeah, in our group, Herman decided to work on healthy eating, sit in his small community. Here are 80 family, and Fabian decided to work on eco village, if I'm right. and I decided to work on a women empowerment center in our university because I think I can apply the 5 criteria on this seat. It is easy for me to apply the 5 criteria, and the other example is a little difficult for me.
Okay, good to hear it. So Irfani, I know that the Women's Center has been around at your university for a while. So in just a few words, we don't have much time left. Can you explain what it will look like for that to go to scale, the existing work? What are you trying to grow?
If I understand your question, because I have a little difficulty in connectivity. In the seat, I'm going to work on that. This is Women Empowerment Center in my community. And we have there the number of students they are benefit from this center, and also the participant they are men and women working together in this center, and also the outsider they are helping this center, like individual donors and some organization. And therefore, I think this seat is a very good seat to work in second community lab on this.
It certainly is. Yeah, there's a lot of opportunities to grow the number of people who are working with the center, and who the center's working for, and who's supporting it. So we'll look forward to exploring that more. All right, we are officially out of time. So thank you all so much for coming, for sharing with us and with your peers. Please continue to think through what growing your seeds will look like, especially focus on step 2, which is engaging with other people involved in the seeds, whether it's phone calls, interviews, emails. You want to continue to gather more information and start to get participation and ownership in the scaling up process from these important stakeholders. Keep up with your studies, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, you.
Thank you.
Come to office hours if you want help on your lab.
Please, I'd love to talk to you.